Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Okay, everybody else.
We're on mute now. Everybody's on mute. So good morning.
Oh, good morning. That's okay. All right.
Good morning. So,
All right. We're here to really discuss the Biden Harris policy toward Africa, which is being formulated. And with us is Jessica Davis-Ba, who is the Senior Coordinator and Special Advisor for Africa in the Office of the Vice President and the Executive Office of the President. She is a Senior Foreign Service Officer with the Department of State, who most recently served as Charge d'Affaires at the Embassy in Chad, in N'Djamena. Jessica led the U.S. mission to advance American interests in Chad by building partnerships to improve security and regional stability, support inclusive governance and human dignity, and to encourage economic development and opportunity through private growth and an improved business and investment climate. Previously, Jessica served as the Deputy Chief of Mission to the U.S. Mission to the African Union and the U.S. Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. In Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, she served as the Deputy Director of the Program Manager, Minister of Interior, management of a $1 billion portfolio of security assistance programs. In Baghdad, Iraq, Jessica was the Deputy Director of the International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Section, forging partnerships in advanced civil security and rule of law. During her service in Nairobi, Jessica played a pivotal role in Kenya's establishment of a financial intelligence unit to combat money laundering and terrorism finance. In Somali Affairs Unit, Jessica engaged stakeholders in Djibouti peace process and shaped the international strategy to encourage the Somali business community to lead reconciliation and development initiatives. Jessica served as the political economic section chief in Conakry, Guinea, and we need to hear about Guinea. And her first overseas assignment was in Lagos, Nigeria. Jessica served in Washington in various capacities, including in the Operations Center Office of Crisis Management Support, where she implemented system improvement for worldwide emergency planning. Let me say that Jessica, to me, of all these titles and things that she's done, the most important one, she's my friend. Her and her husband, Amadou Maktaba, and their 5 sons. They met in my office. Believe it or not, this is a CFA initiative. They met in my office. They have 5 sons. They did not name one of those sons after me. I'm very upset about that. But I can say without that this is a joy to have you, Jessica, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mel. You know, you never know what Mel's gonna say, right? So, but the wonderful thing is that this is really family. And so it's such a pleasure to be here this morning. Before we started, we were joking that it's actually Timothy Pickering, who's the Secretary of War, who's hanging behind me, but it looks like Timothy Pickering's kind of cousins on every single wall here. And that's kind of a helpful reminder of the place in which we are developing our policy towards Africa and leading our engagement towards Africa. There are no African Americans in this suite. There's a couple of photos in certain places here in the building, but not a lot. And so the policy formation, whether it's around Africa or Europe or any other place that the United States engages around the world, is typically done by Americans who aren't necessarily from the African diaspora. And I'd like to just open by saying that really the CFA and the Constituency for Africa and all of the amazing people who are on this line today are the individuals who are creating what the United States looks like as it engages Africa and the rest of the world. And I think that what you'll find in some of the things that I'm going to share, but what I'd really like to do is to leave time for us to talk and to hear from you. As Mel noted, we're in the process of formulating our formal policy towards Africa, but really we are leading with the tenets that this administration started with, which is the fact that equity and justice and inclusion are fundamental to who we are as a nation and how we show up in the world. And so as we talk today, I'll share a little bit about how the Vice President thinks about Africa in relationship to the world. What she's really been talking about is how interconnected our world is, and how our fates are really bound up together. If COVID-19 has not taught us anything at all, it has taught us that we rely on each other, we are impacted by each other, and our success depends on the success of one another. And this is something that President Biden and Vice President Harris, in leading with their foreign policy, is re-engaging with the world, recognizing that we are not an island, that we appreciate, that we want to forge new partnerships, to rebuild and to strengthen existing partnerships, and that we cannot do it alone. And this is really the tenet and the fundamental values which underpin the way in which the United States is looking at Africa. It's a recognition that Africa is at a pivotal moment, and as is the United States. And our futures are really inextricably linked. And this is the way in which Vice President Harris talks about foreign policy for Americans, for all Americans, and for the future. And so with that recognition, we recognize the deep historical ties that the United States and Africa have that bind us to one another. And we're interested in expanding these ties, but how do we build on these ties to really set up the future and set up success in the future? And so if we're looking at the future, we really need to look at young people. The demographics are such, I think, as everybody in this call knows, that if we don't involve the young people of Africa, as the United States as well, what that future looks like is going to be completely different. And the way in which our policy needs to evolve is to be able to be cognizant of, to recognize, and then more importantly, include young people as we think about how we need to show up for today as well as for tomorrow. The way in which we are engaging Africa is fully cognizant of these trends. We are seeking to, and what you'll hear is some themes that are particularly, that will sound familiar, because one of the things is that we do see that the US policy towards Africa tends to be relatively constant, in that there are some key major themes: strengthening democratic progress and institutions, fostering economic growth and institutions, promoting development, inclusive development, and health security, and advancing peace and security. And different leaders, different administrations may put those in different orders, but a lot of the fundamental values and pillars remain the same. I think what you'll hear from this administration, and really where we are focused, is on democracy, and in looking at strengthening democratic institutions in particular, recognizing that there's backsliding across the world, including in our own country, around what that looks like. At the Brussels Forum in June, Vice President Harris focused on the theme of democracy. She said that our era is defined by interconnectedness, by our interdependence, and by our collective fragility. And so while recognizing how strong these values are and these common values that bind, there's also a recognition that they're fragile. They're not guaranteed. If January 6th didn't show us anything, it's recognizing how fragile really this democracy is, including our own. And she said, our constitutional charge is to form a more perfect union. Our democracy, all democracies, are works in progress. Democracies require constant vigilance, constant effort. And it's when we stop doing that work is when we take democracy for granted. And this is when the attacks on democracy are able to grow. And so this is really, I think, the core tenet in terms of, as we look to Africa and as we partner with Africa, it's really a partnership based on mutual respect. It's a partnership based on intent of understanding one another and intent on finding common areas of priority and concern. And the United States is absolutely ready to engage and to partner in a way. And this administration, I think, just in terms of the coming from a place of respect, is something that I think that many of us haven't seen as much as we would have liked in the last several years. So we're really trying to bring this value, this core value back. And so in looking at democracy, it's really this priority to elevate this as an ideal, but then also to do the work and to say, what does this actually mean in practice? Not just as this kind of theoretical concept out there, but what does that mean? What does that look like in terms of if we think about who's participating in the discussions? As we look at good governance, not just from an elections perspective, but good governance of every single kind of institution that we have in the United States, as well as in nations across Africa. And our support for this democratic ideal and democratic progress is really how we seek to look at peace and security, to look at economic development and empowerment. And as we look at all the different themes that are much more emergent, for example, like climate and climate change and cyber and technology, issues that are extremely important for this administration, as well as for Vice President Harris in particular. The president is going to be hosting the Summit for Democracy in December. And it's going to be a virtual summit where they're inviting nations around the world to participate and to really ask for a different level of commitment to defend against authoritarianism, to address and fight corruption, to advance respect for human rights. Because as we look at engaging Africa, as we look at the conflicts, so many are really fundamentally based on the fact that one group, one person, one community, one region doesn't feel like they have the opportunity to participate. They don't have the opportunity to be able to feed their families in the same way as others, even if there are a lot of natural resources that are around. And so how can we look at really empowering leaders, not just heads of state, but encouraging Americans and Africans to lead from where they are. And this is in particular, I think, important as we talk about young people. And so this kind of rising frustration of like, you know, we're waiting for our chance to be there. And older men, in most times, who are really unwilling to give up their seat at the table. And so what does it look like to ensure that we have space for all people, especially from a demographics perspective, for young people to be able to make their voices heard, to be able to engage in decision making? Because when we see that the institutions aren't flexible to do that enough, eventually, and Mel mentioned Guinea, the people get tired and they don't see other opportunities. And so then they go through a non-democratic route because they don't see the institutions being willing to open the doors. And so I'll just kind of say a note about opening the doors. I made light of Mr. Pickering behind me, but it's really important to look at these ideas about equity. And this administration has made a commitment to ensuring that the people who are coming up with our policies towards Africa and the rest of the world look more like America. But that is a works in progress. And so many of you who are on this call really opened the doors and forged the way for my colleagues, in which we're trying to do that to get still now. And I think what's shocking very often is that we haven't made as much progress as we'd like. And so while we are still pushing to ensure that those around the table reflect the voices of the United States, as well as the diversity in the voices across the African continent, we recognize that that's a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition. It's not only about who's sitting at the table, but it's about ensuring that the ideas, that the tenets, that the questions that we're asking are also being able to be mindful about whose voices aren't there. What more can we do? How can we ensure that it's not just about equity in terms of who is sitting at the table, but in terms of the policies and the impact of those policies? What does justice look like when we are talking about economic empowerment? How can we have those conversations across the continent, just like we are having those in the United States? There's so many who ask about the experience of people, especially Black Americans, people from the African diaspora, in how you look at issues of justice, issues of rights, responsibilities in this context. And all that is really part of democracy. That's part of the democratic project. That's part of the democratic process. And this is something that really is fundamental as we look at new tools and look into the future. So I'll just speak a little bit about some of those areas, and then really I want to make sure that I can answer your questions. Because we are still, unfortunately, grappling with this pandemic, at the forefront of almost all of the work that we are doing is around COVID, fighting this pandemic and putting into place the conditions so that we're ready for the next pandemic. And this is something that Vice President Harris is championing in particular. How do we ensure that we're ready for the next pandemic? How do we ensure that we've built resiliency in our health systems, but across all institutions, so that we can rebuild after, once we get to the other side of COVID-19. We're calling it COVID-19, we're in 21 now, and so I don't know where we're going to be as we have all of these different strains, but recognizing that we need to rebuild. How do we do that? How do we invest in it? And that this administration, I think, has really put resources towards ensuring that the United States, as well as the world, can build back better. And so you've heard that regularly in a regular refrain in the United States. There's also an initiative called Build Back Better World, which is around building an infrastructure and investing in infrastructure worldwide that's more resilient. It's about building the conditions so that American companies can be more competitive. And this is in particularly true in Africa. And so building on some of the work that was done by the last administration, the creation of the Development Finance Corporation, for example, Prosper Africa. This administration has taken on Prosper Africa and really talking about a Build Back Better campaign to be able to tailor it and to include small to medium-sized enterprises, women-owned enterprises, to think more strategically around technology, and certainly to integrate the climate in ways that the original Prosper Africa weren't necessarily considering. At the same time, we're looking at how can we develop new initiatives, for example, to take advantage of technologies that can, I should say, bring us together, but that often have actually divided us even more. And so how do we work with our African colleagues to look at issues of technology in a strategic sense, but then also around security, cybersecurity, and all of the other different kinds of ways to mitigate and to manage the risk that also comes with these technologies. I'd mentioned young people. We continue to invest in YALI, which is a signature initiative, the Young Africa Leaders Initiative, and related programs around YALI to really empower young people across the continent. And I have to tell you that I think that anytime I've had the opportunity to engage with, or even to select individuals to participate in this program, I'm constantly blown away by how dynamic and entrepreneurial and energized our young Africans are. And when you see them engage with their peers here in the United States and the kinds of ideas and initiatives that they come up with, it's just phenomenal. How can we invest more in taking this idea from just something theoretical to actually implementing it? So we'll continue to strengthen YALI. We're also focused on enhancing two-way trade. And I'd love to hear your thoughts around AGOA and what comes next. We're constantly, we're cognizant and supportive of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and interested in how we can work through this initiative, building what's really the largest trade bloc to be able to gain greater advantage for America, for American companies and for entrepreneurs. And at the same time, to gain greater advantage for communities across the continent. And so we're looking at, and part of our policy is looking at these initiatives like Build Back Better World and the African Continental Free Trade Area, and ensuring that they are synced so that we can be ready to be able to support and to work with and to really build on what this means moving forward. I'll take a note also just about security and peace and security. While we look across the continent, we are, I think, if you think about the amount of hours that are focused on crises and challenges and the kinds of high-level meetings, they are, I think, unfortunately, kind of focused on insecurity and looking at the crisis. And what we are also really, what's really important is to address those crises, but to look at the root causes of those crises. What's really happening at the base of these really, in some cases, catastrophic crises that are taking the lives and making individuals across the continent much more vulnerable than they already were. And this is exacerbated by COVID-19. How can we address the root causes of those conflicts, as well as addressing them, the immediate effects as immediately as possible? Recognizing that there's not a military long-term solution. While we work very closely with our colleagues in the military and security forces across the continent, and as Mel shared in terms of some of my background, really most of my work has really been focused on working and engaging in the security sector. But we recognize that you know, the defense D, if you will, the kind of 3D approach still holds, that you can't just only have a focus on the military or security sector on defense without looking at development, without looking at diplomacy, and diplomacy not just kind of from a foreign policy perspective, but diplomacy which really is just about people-to-people exchanges and conversation. But it's really important for the United States as we look at Africa is to look at equal partners, to look at shared interests, and to really recognize that our prosperity are intertwined. And so I think I'll end with that. Happy to answer specific questions, but more, I'd really love to hear your ideas. We're about 8 months now into this administration. We have started, but quite frankly, the focus on the pandemic, Afghanistan, and a lot of other issues has drawn attention from focusing in the area of which I'm most passionate about, which is looking at Africa. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we build a stronger coalition for Africa, how we build a stronger constituency for Africa, and how we ensure that the ideas from all of the experts who are here on this call are really resounding around all of the halls here in the White House. So thanks so much.
Jessica, thank you very much for your comprehensive discussion about the policy toward Africa. Let me say that you ended on the need to educate Americans about Africa, build a constituency to support Africa, and we're going to need your help to educate Americans about Africa. Americans are uneducated, undereducated, and miseducated about Africa. They don't even understand why we're engaged. With that being said, let me turn it over to Stanley Strouder, who's a member of the CFA board, one of my really mentors. He worked closely with Reverend Leon Sullivan for many years to put on the summits. So he's going to manage the Q&A portion of the program. Stan.
Thank you very much, Mel. I want to thank Jessica for her wonderful comments. And I also want to say, you know, I'm almost embarrassed with so many prominent people on this call. Who you call on, Jessica? I mean, everybody they have lived most of this stuff and been engaged in it, especially with Ambassador Robin Saunders, Kip Ward, and Johnny Carson. I mean, they could have a master class in their own. So I want to apologize to everybody at first if I don't get to you, but on that, and I also want to get.
And don't forget, Orrin Wyke is also on this call.
Who's that?
Orrin has just been appointed.
Well,
to
I want to
the
congratulate Orrin.
Don't, you know, anyway.
I want to congratulate her for her appointment to the African Development Bank and appreciate having a sister over there again, and it's really wonderful. Let me.
Can I just interject quickly? And I'm not going to say much, but thank you for your support, for the CFA's support. Stanley, we go back quite a while as well. Yes. I haven't gotten it yet. It is just an official nomination. I just wanted to be clear. I still have to go through the Senate confirmation process, but I feel it's an honor to go back to the bank where I was at back a while ago, as well as working with the Africa and U.S. Bank. And so keep your fingers crossed that this will happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We appreciate you. And, you know, I can still picket if we need to do some picket. You know what I mean? I haven't gotten that old. So, Jessica, I wanted to take advantage of some of our real leadership here. And you talked about security. And I wanted to, since we have Ambassador Carson here, Kip Ward and Ambassador Robin Sanders on, who have lived this work in Africa, across Africa. I wanted to ask Ambassador Carson to pose a question with respect to security in West Africa, the Horn of West Africa and Ethiopia and the Horn. These are issues that, while we want to talk about peace and security, it's difficult when we have this rise of terrorism going on and these coups going on. So Ambassador Carson, would you just pose a question to her, to the ambassador, and then we can try to move on, okay?
Stan, I'm coming off of my mute button. First of all, I want to thank Jessica for what I thought was an excellent presentation, and thank you very much for the role that you are playing at the White House and in the Vice President's office, and wish you great success as you move forward. Let me, I didn't know Stan was going to ask me to ask a question, but while I do, I'm going to take the opportunity, if I could, to maybe ask a couple of questions. The first question I have is with respect to the military coups that have occurred in a number of African countries, and the illegal transitions of governance, not only in Guinea, but twice in Mali over the last year, irregular change of government in Chad as well, where we saw the president die and his son, who was not in the line of succession, suddenly take over. The question I have is the United States speaking out loudly and clearly on the issue of the illegality and the change of governments? We have had a statute on the books for many years that requires the U.S. government to cut off all but humanitarian assistance to governments that come into power as a result of coups and extrajudicial changes of government. Are we coming down forcefully enough against regimes and leaders who are in effect engaging in illegal coups d'etats? We know and have seen from the Afrobarometer that a clear majority, some 70% of all Africans when polled, say that they prefer democratic multi-party governments and that they are strongly opposed to coups d'etats. But are we speaking out clearly and consistently enough with respect to this issue, and have countries like Egypt distorted what we can and cannot do? Second question, much shorter. Who's likely to be invited to participate in the Vice President's Democracy Summit in December? And how are you going to, what criteria are you going to use to invite African participants, especially in light of some of the irregularities and anti-democratic tendencies that are underway in a number of African states. Again, I want to, Jessica, thank you very much for what you're doing, and continue to do it with the skill that you have. Thanks. Thanks, Dan. Sorry to be long.
Jenny, thank you. Mrs. Madam Ba.
Well, it is, I think by the way in which Ambassador Carson posed the question, I would probably believe that he and many others think that the United States could probably be speaking out more strongly. Certainly there have been irregular changes in government, and there is a formal process by which the United States government makes a policy determination. And in many of those cases, we have not. I think there is a sense of guarding some certain amount of flexibility, looking at the context. And I would definitely say that there are several different kinds of perspectives on how publicly we should come out against this. I think certainly in every single one of the cases that you mentioned, Ambassador, we have made clear public statements to recognize the illegality and to urge a return to democratic process. In terms of the actual actions in cutting off assistance, that has varied. But I would like to hear from all of those on the panel, because I think that from what you said, it's a sense of if we don't speak out as forcefully, then the focus on where we are on democracy and the importance of democratic institutions is also made more fragile by that. And so I'd love to hear other people's perspectives on that. In terms of the criteria for the Summit for Democracies, I think that for this summit and for any other kind of, White House engagement, what a lot of this administration is seeking to do is to say, you're going to need to make specific commitments to be part of the conversation and to come to the table. Certainly that's the case for the COVID summit. There's a summit that's going to be that the president is convening next week on the margins of the UN General Assembly. And so we're looking at countries to come who will make a very specific commitment to how they're going to address COVID-19 and health security more generally. And I think that you'll see the same for the Summit for Democracy. So what are the specific criteria what are the specific, I don't want to say only commitments, but commitments and then followed up with action. Because one of the things with the Summit for Democracy, they're going to have a virtual one the president will convene a virtual one this December, with the idea that 1 year from December, there will be an in-person summit to be able to really chart exactly what each country, and it's not just countries, it's also organizations and institutions as well, how much they've actually implemented with respect to that commitment. And so that's going to really be driving the criteria. I think if you were to look at the Freedom House index on freedom, how many countries across the continent are free, it's a very, very, very small number. And so certainly I think we would want to have more participation than just those countries, but certainly we would want to also lift up those that are already at that place and others that are making very important steps, even given the context, to be able to try to move more towards being a democracy. But I think, as I said over at the beginning, that democracy is also a work in progress. And so we recognize that as well.
Thank you, Jessica. Let me just ask, Ambassador Carson can do anything he wants to do. So that means you guys can't answer a long, can't give her a long question. He's my idol. So the next thing I want to do is just ask, I'm gonna bring two people at the time, Jessica, if you don't mind, and ask them to give a short question, short question so you can respond to. So in that regard, I wanted to ask Dr. Will Mega to make a short question on the area of health, and also Reverend, my Reverend here, to talk about Jonathan Weaver, forgive me, Jonathan Weaver, to talk about faith-based community also. So Dr. Mega, please.
Thank you very much, Stanley. Thank you for that presentation, Jessica. I think one of the key things you talked about was health security. You also mentioned COVID-19, which obviously is the world in which we live in right now. So one of the questions that we would like to ask, and probably the only question for the time we have, is that, we know from COVID-19 and Ebola that Africa has this lack of health security infrastructure. And so given the demographic makeup of the continent, shouldn't the United States consider supporting vaccine manufacturing capacity in Africa as a matter of security?
Thank you, Will. Reverend, you want to go ahead and ask your question, and Ambassador, she could get back to us with answer to both of you quickly, okay?
Thank you, Sam, very much. Madam Jessica Ba, I'm delighted to be with you and all of my colleagues today. From the perspective of the Black faith community in particular, many of us have been actively engaged in Africa for many, many years, and in fact for decades, specifically in the area of even medical missions projects, and also in terms of education, and most recently, of course, using technology for training, and not just in areas pertaining to the church, but also with the emotional, mental needs of people, and with thousands of people within our constituencies, within Black churches, within mosques. My question to you is, what role do you see for the faith community, the Black faith community in particular, in the Biden-Harris administration vis-a-vis Africa?
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Great, thank you. I would say for health security, absolutely. We actually are already looking at investing in vaccine manufacturing on the continent. DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, is exploring and looking at funding and has already funded some projects. And that is something that there is a huge interest in expanding. In fact, just looking in the last couple of days on what other different health partners we can work with to make that kind of investment, recognizing that being able to do vaccine manufacturing, because of the level of sophistication, there's a lot of other requirements, in particular energy requirements, that also need to be built out. But that's absolutely what we were looking at, and not only vaccines, but also PPE, other therapeutics, and the whole kind of health ecosystem, if you will. So recognizing being able to be prepared for the next pandemic, vaccine manufacturing and health infrastructure is extremely important. I would say that the investment that we did make with respect to Ebola actually ensured that many countries were much more prepared when it came to COVID, even more so than countries in Europe or in others that hadn't had that same kind of experience. And so in the early stages, we were actually looking at some of the best practices from the continent and how we dealt with Ebola. And even during COVID, if you recall, we had Ebola outbreaks. And those outbreaks, actually, we were able to contain them much more quickly than we had in the last time we had a significant Ebola outbreak. And that's because of the investment the United States and other partners have made. So we really need to build on that. And I would say for the faith-based community, quite frankly, this administration wouldn't be in this White House if it weren't for the faith-based community. I think, and they recognize that. And so this community, and the Black faith-based community in particular, I think has a very prominent role to play you'll see across all of the vice president's work on voting rights, for example, the faith-based community is extremely important. And so it's not, as I was talking about in terms of kind of who's at the table, so it's around ensuring that the perspectives and the leaders, the communities that faith-based communities in which they are situated, both here in the United States, but those long-standing connections to the continent, that we really strengthen those, that we invest in them. And at the same time, ensuring that when we focus on human rights, we also speak about the freedom to worship in any way that a person would like. And so it's both looking at, again, kind of thinking not just about who's at the table or who's participating, which is absolutely important, but also ensuring that the values are also part and parcel and intertwined in our policy and the value of respecting people from all faiths.
Ambassador, thank you. I just want to, as a point of preference here, I wanted to just have one of my great leaders, our great leaders, is son of one of the people I still read every day, the great Marcus Messiah Garvey. I wanted to ask Dr. Julius Garvey just to give us, he's been a part of this struggle since I've known him, and I want to appreciate his leadership. But Julius, you have seen a lot of this, and one of the main questions is the work of the African American community and the African immigrant community in terms of philosophy of your great dad. Give us a few seconds and share with us so that Jessica can get a sense of what are we doing? Are we closer to the African and African American colleagues? I know she mentioned the lack of Black representation in the State Department and those kind of issues. Could you just help us circle around that a little bit, Dr. Garvey?
Well, certainly I'd like to thank Madame Bao, for her summary of the Biden-Harris policy initiatives that we can look forward to during this presidency. I think there are two areas that we would make comments on that she mentioned. One would be democracy, and the other one would be the economic development on the African continent. And I think, Ambassador Carson mentioned three areas: Guinea, Mali, and Chad, that have had recent coups, certainly undemocratic, and the governments themselves have been undemocratic. But note that those are Francophone countries. Note that France still has colonies in Africa. France has never given up its colonies. France bleeds Africa of $60 billion every year. I think the United States should make a stand against colonialism that France practices in Africa. Certainly in the Francophone countries, I would say, since the 60s, there have been more than 15 or somewhere between 10 and 15 assassination of leaders who have sought to move Africa in the right direction. So democracy is something that's very, very fundamental, but it's not something that's very superficial. It's not just about one man, one vote. It's about serious policy initiatives. And I think the United States of America and those of us who have fought for our freedom need to fight for the freedom of African people to get away from the colonization of France. That's one area in terms of democracy. Now, I think in terms of economic development, I think we have to realize what has happened from the Bretton Woods period onwards, from 1944 onwards. If you look at the G20, only one African country is represented on the G20, and that's South Africa. And certainly South African economy is totally different from sub-Saharan Africa's economy. It's the same thing in the World Bank. There are like 25 countries that are part of the World Bank's mission, African countries, and yet still, as far as this board is concerned, only about 5% of the voting rights on the board are African. So these are the things that keep Africa down, because they don't have a seat at the policy levels. And it's not just about educating young people, because if you educate them and you bring them up within a system that still disadvantages them, all you're going to get is more rebellion. So now, in terms of any sort of changes, that's one of the things that I would suggest. In terms of foreign direct investment in Africa. I would suggest an increase in that. I think one of the things that could be done in terms of American and other companies, the African countries should not have to bear the tax-free burden, so to speak. In other words, the United States now, companies that invest in Africa, they should give them a tax-free ride. And the United States companies that invest in Africa, so that the African countries wouldn't have to give them the tax-free ride. They should be able to collect taxes from them there. Yeah, another thing that can be done, because we have a large number of African Americans, we have a large number of people in the Caribbean, we have a large number of African immigrants here in the United States of America. And we can increase our foreign direct investment. But the problem is that there are obstacles in terms of the US with regulations that restrict diaspora trust funds and bonds. So we need policies now that would allow us to be able to accumulate our wealth in the diaspora and be able to invest it in Africa, the countries of our choice or the areas of our choice, whether it's mining or agriculture, without these sort of restrictions on the side of the American government or other governments. So those are just sort of two little quick bites there in terms of increasing foreign direct investment. Thank you very much, Stan, and thank you very much,
Thank
Mel.
you, Dr.
And thank you very much,
Thank you.
Madam Ba.
Jessica, you want to share a couple of things with us on that in terms of his remarks, if you like?
Sure. I would say that the United States, France, UK, and other countries have very particular experiences on the continent and very unique histories with the continent. And I think certainly we, in looking at America with Africa, we have a very unique perspective, which is very different from France. And while the United States and France are close allies, I think that we take a different approach to how we engage with our partners on the continent. And certainly in the work that I do, I always try to make it clear that this is really a uniquely American approach, even as we might work with other colleagues. And I think that there's a sense of appreciation often, but that also needs to, from our partners on the continent, with an American approach, which tends to be more, I think, I don't want to say pragmatic, but just kind of like more of a, this is what we're trying to do and you get what you see. There's always caveats with that, of course, as well. But I would say that so much really rests on a country, on a community's ability to be able to put forth an independent voice. We're seeing much more the influence of countries like China on the continent, which isn't new, but I think it's taken a whole different level as China is engaging, and the way in which African communities who might have been very, very enthusiastic about Chinese investment and partnerships a decade ago or even two, are less enthusiastic because they see the kinds of relationships those are. We also seek to ensure that we demonstrate what is very unique from our approach, in particular with respect to investment, and a Chinese approach. More and more, we're seeing countries like Russia with very distinct interests on the continent, Gulf countries as well, which have historic ties, but are looking at their ways in which they engage countries, in particular in the Horn of Africa, in a different way. And I think that we also recognize that, and this is, I think, a distinction from the last administration. It's not about telling our partners, oh, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't work with them. It's about showing how our model is a better model. And Dr. Garvey, I really appreciate some of the specific suggestions that you made. And I know that when Mel and I talked about having this session, I said, let's have it earlier rather than later, as we're in the earlier processes of doing a policy formation. So please pull those together as recommendations from the CFA, because it is really important to have really concrete ways in which to look at investment. I would say that Prosper Africa, and this is, as we're really trying to have a much more dynamic investment vehicles. They've offered to do a follow-up conversation with you through you, Mel. I know that you had a whole session yesterday on trade and investment as part of the series. I think that there's really a need to focus on concrete ways. For example, the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund has invested in Africa through looking at Prosper Africa. And so how do we structure these kinds of very specific investments? The USAID is doing a lot of work on remittances and how to complement remittances that are flowing usually from family member to family member into much more national level or community level development work. And so those are complementary. So that I think that there's a recognition that it's not just about traditional forms of aid or humanitarian assistance, but it's really around FDI and then complementing those financial flows with existing financial flows like remittances or other resources that actually are enormously large. And I think surprise many who don't know the kinds of trade flows and resource flows that are happening, not just back and forth between the US and Africa, but really in a dynamic way worldwide.
Thank you.
Stan,
Stanley's
you're on
mumbling.
mute.
Thank you for your response.
Stan, you're on mute.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. I just wanted to thank you for your remarks and on this one. And I think in terms of the business, we're going to be talking about that some more as we go forward. But I wanted to take a transition to ask Kendra Thompson, who was participated in the returning Black Peace Corps volunteers. And I see that as an opportunity for us to help people, the foreign service and the diplomatic community, because these people come back with such wonderful skills and experiences abroad. And Mel and Janine was smart enough to do a forum this week with the returning Black Peace Corps volunteers, and I know she participated. Could you just give us a brief word so that Jessica could see what we're trying to do in the private sector to help people, her agency over there. So Ms. Thompson.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Clendandra Thompson. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Senegal from 2012 to 2014, and in the community economic development sector, working with the women's group there. And it's always just very compelling to hear many different Peace Corps volunteers experience, but then once they return back to the States, their dedication, their passion for international development, international affairs, things of that nature, and how they can continue to be engaged in foreign policy as a whole. I, being a volunteer who was on the continent, having come back and trying to find ways to stay engaged, both in activities that are happening on the continent, in West Africa, perhaps in particular, but in the United States as well. I've, become engaged with some of the activities of Constituency for Africa with the intention of just trying to propel what I've learned and what I've come to love. In the group that we had a couple of days ago on Tuesday, that passion is there, that dedication, that commitment is there, both on a personal level as well as on a professional level. And it's something that just continues to kind of permeate. But there is a bit of a frustration there of trying to find opportunities and ways to stay engaged, to be an assistant of any type, of any way, to activities that are going on the continent. And that's, again, whether it's personal, whether it's, in someone's on personal private life or, within a professional career. And so opportunities like this to talk with you, to hear what's going on in the administration, and to hear what the ideas and what the plans are, and to kind of get a better idea of the trajectory of the administration's intentions on the continent is just very impactful. And I do think that there's an opportunity, albeit a bit of a wild opportunity, but a bit of an opportunity to continue engaging those who have served in Peace Corps in some form or fashion with some of the work that's going on in the administration. Again, a wild consideration, but again, these are people who are passionate, interested, and have expertise on the village level typically, and who are just very eager to kind of continue that engagement. I think that's even more so for those of us Black volunteers who served on the continent to kind of find ways to stay engaged, again, whether personally or professionally. So again, thank you so much for your time. And I don't want to belabor the point looking at the time now, but again, thank you for your efforts, and thank you for the question, Mr. Strada.
Hey, Stan, can I jump in for a minute?
Yes, go ahead, Mel.
Because we're talking about something close to my heart. Jessica, one of the areas, we talked about the Peace Corps and the Black Peace Corps volunteers. A major part of that session had to do with diversity and inclusion in the ranks of the Peace Corps, not only in terms of volunteers, but also in terms of staff and in terms of policy. So I wanted to make sure that we had Ambassador Gina Abercrombie Winstanley as the keynote speaker for that affair, and Karen Bass also added comments. So this whole question about diversity in the foreign policy process is dear to our heart, and we certainly want to hear what you have to say about that. I want you also to comment on the Ethiopia-Eritrea quagmire. I know it's convoluted, and I know the administration is heavily engaged. I know you wasn't at us, but can you shed some light about how the Biden-Harris administration is looking at the conflict in Ethiopia and in Tigray?
Great. I would say the Peace Corps probably is one of our most powerful tools, if you will, across the continent. It's so amazing at how so many of the leaders who I have gotten to meet, they're like, I learned English in, fill in the blank year from the Peace Corps volunteer, whose name they always still remember. Actually from the last post where I was, one of my colleagues went to Chad in 1974 as a Peace Corps volunteer and just never left. And he still works there in Chad, lives there in Chad. And it is really, I think, such a beautiful, beautiful experience. And that's one that it marks people in a positive way for the rest of their lives. I don't know if there's already an existing program, but I'm just thinking when you were speaking about YALI, which is another really important program for us, are there ways to have kind of like short-term kinds of Peace Corps volunteer periods working with YALI alumni, for example, or YALI, I know that as part when they come to the United States, they do that, but are there ways, especially with technology, that we can do that in a much more dynamic way and to build these kinds of relationships where a Peace Corps volunteer can volunteer a piece of their time in order to work with a young person on whatever the projects are that they are focused. Because I think, as you did say, is that Peace Corps volunteers of color, especially Black Peace Corps volunteers who've had the chance to work in Africa, are forever changed by that experience. And how do we build on that? How do we welcome them into foreign service, into the State Department, into USAID, into Department of Commerce, into the US government, or into private sector, but continuing to work overseas because they have a certain kind of appreciation and respect for these communities. Ethiopia is, I would say, probably the issue that we end up spending most time on with respect to Africa in this building. And the Ethiopia, Eritrea kind of quagmire, as you called it, Mel. I was actually in Addis when Abiy came into office, and it was such a exciting moment where really, I think the country was thrilled to be able to have this sense of newness and opportunity. Certainly it was recognized by the Nobel Peace Prize Committee and in conferring him that honor very early on. And I think it's really, it's beyond tragic in terms of how fast things change. Certainly at the time, I think we all hoped for the best, but there was definitely a concern about reaching out and opening so many kind of floodgates at once, and how do you manage all of these personalities and influences. And while it was great to see the Ethiopia reaching out to Eritrea, certainly Eritrea's role now with respect to Tigray in particular is, I mean, the reports that we're getting from Tigray are unlike anything that I have seen, I think that many have seen or could even imagine in 2021. And more than anything, we have repeated a refrain of an immediate cessation of violence, to have talks, but just to stop immediately, to stop the killing. And unfortunately, it keeps happening. There's blockades and blockages on getting assistance to the most vulnerable people. And the UN and others have reported that the scale of the catastrophe, not only in Tigray, but how it resonates and the impact that will have on the entire region can lead to enormous instability. We've just announced our first sanctions under the Global Magnitsky Act on Eritrea, an Eritrean military officer, to indicate how serious the US government is looking at those who are, I don't even want to call it spoilers. It's not about spoiler, it's about people, individuals and also institutions that are undermining the very fabric of this whole region. But unfortunately, these sanctions and our responses don't seem to be having an impact. It is such a complicated, such a complex situation with such deep roots in history that I think that very few people even understand what is happening, and being able to untangle that quagmire. Certainly the United States doesn't have any kind of a secret answer. And for those who have some ideas on what we can do to make a difference for the millions of people whose very lives are at risk, we'd like to hear it, because we are working within using our sanctions and other different kinds of tools, direct engagement. The president appointed Ambassador Jeff Feltman as a special envoy to the Horn of Africa, and he is engaged every single day with the leaders and the communities to be able to try to stop the violence and to move forward in the solution. But we aren't there yet.
Stan, we passed our time already, shockingly. This has been the past hour.
Well, no, I just wanted to ask, Ambassador gave us a timeline in December where there would be a summit. Some of our people in the chat are asking, what is the summit and what is the date? It's going to be open to the public. Please, Ambassador, please let us know.
Sure, I think it is the 20th to the 21st, the Summit for Democracy. I believe in December it will be virtual. And I think the details are still under development, but I'll be sure to share those with Mel to be able to send out to the rest of the community, as well as some other different resources to which you might be interested. I think that we could have, there's a lot of issues to really unpack. And I think it would be great as we look to develop a more formal policy with respect to specific initiatives for US engagement with Africa. We'd love to hear from you. I would say that the vice president, before she embarks on anything new, she does a listening, if you will, where she asks experts their thoughts on whatever it is that she's getting ready to engage on. And certainly I will share with her some of the perspectives that you've shared and the questions that you've asked, but I would love to share other different recommendations that come from this really esteemed group. It's really an honor to be able to have shared this time with you this morning, and I hope that it's not the last.
Let me say that CFA is going to be writing a formal paper within the next 2 weeks to Jessica, outlining some of our thoughts. And so anybody on the delegation can certainly share your thoughts and ideas with me within the next week or so, and we'll try to incorporate as many as we can into that paper. I want to turn it over to Janine Scott, who is the chairman of the CFA's board, for her closing remarks. If I don't call on her, then I'm out of a job. So
you're right. Jessica, thank you so much. This has really been enlightening, and we really appreciate not just your time, but the fact that you are committed to engaging with us. We really appreciate the importance that the administration is trying to place on the African continent, looking forward to developing new policy and initiatives. And I think that matters a great deal to us, especially coming out of the past few years. I think the fact that you all are focusing on justice, equity, and inclusion is also very, very timely. And we look forward really to continuing, Stewie, to continuing this engagement. Squirrels. I think that by way of some of the things that I really would like to say, oh my God, excuse me, Stewie, please. That's what happens when you have a dog and you work from home, is that we'd like to, I had two recommendations that I just wanted to briefly mention for you. One was creating a platform for minority small business participation between the U.S. and Africa. Can give you more details on that, but really to facilitate direct interaction between the minority-owned small businesses in the U.S. and Africa. And that comes out of the spirit of what Ron Brown really tried to do, and we are in the Ron Brown series now. Creating active investment vehicles to catalyze mid-sized businesses as well. Those are two things that I wanted to mention specifically, because we know that even with some of the things that we have been seeing in the areas of trade and investment under Prosper Africa and the like, that small businesses, whether on this side or the other side, have not been able to engage as much. But we'll go into that more in the future and in our recommendations. Again, I think one of the most important things, apart from thanking you, is to say that we would really like to remain engaged moving forward. I think that this is the first of what I hope will be several interactions, and that we are able to continue to provide these types of inputs, and that we are actively engaged as a stakeholder community with the administration. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for everyone who participated this morning, for your questions and your interactions.
And in closing, Bill, you got my pictures? Bill.
Yes, sir. Hold on.
By the way, Bill is the guy behind the scene. He's a PhD student from Harvard University working on medical something. I just want to say, Jessica, these are her boys. This was in 2017 in Addis Ababa. And I recently had a dinner with them, so we talked about this and her new job in the Vice President's office. So Jessica, I just really want to say thank you very much for giving your time, and we know we have a lot to follow up and to continue to share. You can expect to hear have our paper within the next 2 weeks. General Ward, you want to say a final thing? I wanted to call on you.
Thanks very much, Jessica. I appreciated the discussion as well as the points made. And like so many of us, the continent of Africa remains very important from a resource, its people, the population, the youth, as well as the global commons and its stability. So thank you very much for what you do. And we look forward to supporting as we might. This is important. This is important. This is important. So God bless all. Thanks very much.
Adrian Holmes from Cambridge, Maryland, who is my hero. I'm gonna give you the last word.
Hello, everyone. And Jessica, thank you for just wonderful, engaging conversation. I'll make mine really quick. We are in Cambridge, Maryland, where we have, for the past 3 years, kicked off the Ron Brown series in Cambridge with our friend Mel Foote. His work, the work of CFA, the work of ADASI and other agencies that promote Africa in rural communities like ours is critical. So if there is a way that we can expand the capacity of these organizations, expand the funding for these organizations that bring ambassadors, that bring programming to rural communities like us, we ask, please do so. And thank you, Mel. Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you, everyone, for just an awesome call. Thank you so much.
Jessica, the last word is yours.
All right. Well, I think as we started with, I think it's this is not at all the last conversation, so it can't be the last word. It's maybe a comma before the next conversation, because so many of you on this call have so much experience. And maybe if you have a little bit more time, please give that experience, give your perspectives from the health sector, military, rural engagement, Ethiopian, diaspora from Ghana, from the Caribbean. So many perspectives on here around health. And we need all of this. We need you. This is not policy formation in a vacuum. This is foreign policy for America. You are America, we are America. And so we need to make sure that our voices are represented in what this looks like moving forward, because what we decide, what we set the stage for today is going to have ramifications, not just for next year, but really for generations to come.
And I want to say that the people in this call, Jessica, we want to be on the front line in supporting U.S. policy toward Africa. We want to be on the front line in supporting you, Kamala Harris, and President Joe Biden as you move forward with this administration. So thank you very much for your time and effort, and we look forward to the follow-up.